If you think this is about pleasure alone, you're missing what's actually driving her. Most men assume there's one obvious explanation here. Either she's into the physical sensation or she's doing it because you want it. And for some women, sure, that's part of it. But when you actually look at the research, real interviews, real data, not assumptions, the picture that emerges is a lot more complex and honestly, a lot more interesting. There's a reason women give for this that has almost nothing to do with the physical act itself. And most men never think to ask what it actually is. By the end of this video, you're going to understand the real psychology behind this. What's actually driving the decision, what the research says about the emotional side of it, and just as importantly, what it looks like when it's not the right fit at all. Let's get into it. Hi, I'm Janice Powell. I'm a men's sex therapist, and I've spent over a decade helping men understand what's actually happening for the women in their lives, not the assumptions, the reality. Today, we're covering the real research on why women engage in anal sex, the psychological and relational drivers behind it, what it can mean emotionally, and just as importantly, how to approach the conversation with the honesty and care it actually requires. If you want more of this kind of research-backed, clinically grounded content, hit subscribe now. This channel exists to replace guesswork with real understanding. Before we dive into the research, I want to say something directly. Most men going into this topic, whether they're curious about it, whether their partner has brought it up, or whether it's already part of their relationship, are working with almost no real information. Not from school, not from their fathers, not from the culture around them, which either avoids the topic entirely or treats it as a punchline. Most men have never once heard an honest clinical breakdown of what's actually going on for her psychologically, physically, emotionally around this specific topic. That gap isn't your fault, but closing it is your responsibility, especially if this is something that matters in your relationship right now. If you want to go deeper than what I can cover in a single video, if you want a complete step-by-step understanding of how a woman's body and mind actually respond to intimacy, trust, and communication, from the first conversation all the way through to what happens in the bedroom, I partnered with an experienced urologist to build a full course for men who want real, consistent understanding. Not guesswork, not once in a while luck, consistent. Check the pinned comment. I've left the link there. It'll give you full access. Now, let's get into the research. Let's start with what the actual research says, because it's more nuanced than most people assume. A qualitative study published in a peer-reviewed sexual health journal interviewed women directly about their motivations, and one theme came up more than almost any other: intimacy and trust. Many women described this specific act as a marker of exceptional closeness with a partner, something reserved for a relationship where trust had already been firmly established, not something offered casually. For a meaningful number of women, the emotional significance mattered more than the physical sensation itself. Curiosity showed up as a second major driver. A number of women described wanting to explore a new dimension of their own body or break from routine sexual patterns they'd settled into. This wasn't necessarily about the specific act, it was about novelty and self-exploration more broadly. A third theme, and one worth sitting with honestly, wanting to please a partner. Separate research identified this as one of several distinct categories, alongside personal desire and what researchers called a quid pro quo dynamic, engaging in it as part of a broader, negotiated give and take within the relationship. Interestingly, this same research found that most instances weren't planned or discussed in advance, which tells us something important. This often isn't a carefully deliberated decision. It's frequently situational, spontaneous, and shaped by the mood and dynamic of that specific moment. What's notable across this research is what's largely absent: an assumption that this is primarily or even mostly about physical pleasure for its own sake. That's the popular assumption. It's not what the data actually shows. One honest caveat, because clinical accuracy matters to me more than a clean narrative. Some of the most cited research in this space drew from specific, non-representative samples, for instance. One widely referenced study recruited participants through a drug treatment and health screening program, not the general population. That doesn't invalidate the findings, but it does mean we should hold them as informative rather than universal. Motivations vary enormously by individual, relationship, and context. There's no single explanation that applies to every woman. So let's go deeper into why trust shows up as such a dominant theme, because understanding this changes how you should think about the entire topic. When something is culturally coded as taboo or highly private, offering access to it can function psychologically as a trust signal, a way of communicating. I feel safe enough with you to do this. That's not universal and it's not automatic. But among women who described positive experiences in the research, this theme repeated consistently. The act itself mattered less than what it represented about the relationship. This connects to something we've covered before on this channel. Physical intimacy and emotional safety aren't separate systems. They're deeply intertwined. When a woman feels emotionally secure, unhurried, unjudged, genuinely respected, she's far more likely to experience any form of intimacy, including this one, as positive rather than merely tolerated. The research also surfaced something equally important, and it's the part most content on this topic skips entirely. Negative experiences were common too. Physical pain, discomfort, and in some cases, distressing experiences involving inadequate preparation or communication were reported by a meaningful portion of participants. Even among women who found aspects of it pleasurable, many still preferred other forms of intimacy overall. This isn't a minor footnote, it's central to understanding the full picture honestly. There's also a more serious finding worth naming directly, because avoiding it would be a disservice to you and to the women in your life. Some women in this research reported participating not out of desire, but because they didn't feel able to refuse. That's not a technique problem. That's a consent and communication problem, and it's one every man needs to take seriously, regardless of what the rest of this video covers. Psychologically, then, the honest picture is this. When trust, communication, and genuine enthusiasm are present, this can function as a meaningful expression of intimacy for some women. When any of those are missing, it can become something closer to obligation or coercion, even when nothing is said aloud. The difference isn't physical, it's entirely psychological and relational. Practical application. So how do you actually navigate this responsibly? A few principles directly from the research. Create space for the honest answer, not the easy one. If this is something you're curious about, raise it as an open conversation, not an expectation. Ask what she thinks and feels about it specifically, not what she thinks you want to hear. Watch for compliance versus genuine interest. These can look similar on the surface and are completely different underneath. Genuine interest tends to come with curiosity, initiation, or clear enthusiasm. Compliance tends to come with hesitation, deflection, or agreement that feels more like avoidance of conflict than desire. If she says no, that's a complete answer, not a starting point for negotiation. A significant portion of women have no interest in this at all. And that's an entirely normal, valid preference, not something to be talked out of. If she says yes, slow down and prioritize comfort. Given how consistently physical discomfort showed up in the research, generous preparation, communication throughout, and a willingness to stop at any point aren't optional extras. They're the difference between an experience she'll want to repeat and one she'll quietly endure. Revisit the conversation. Don't assume it's settled forever. Interest and comfort can change over time in either direction. What was true a year ago isn't necessarily true now. None of this is complicated, but it does require actually having the conversation rather than assuming, guessing, or avoiding it entirely, which is exactly where most men go wrong. The missing piece. Here's what almost no content on this topic addresses honestly. This isn't for everyone, and it doesn't need to be. A substantial portion of women have little to no interest in this specific act for reasons ranging from physical discomfort to simple preference, and none of those reasons require justification. Treating disinterest as a problem to solve rather than a legitimate preference to respect is one of the fastest ways to damage trust in a relationship. The exact opposite of what the research shows this act is often meant to represent in the first place. There's also the coercion finding from earlier, and I want to return to it directly because it matters more than almost anything else in this video. Feeling unable to say no is not the same as consent, even if the words yes or silence were technically present. If you sense hesitation, deflection, or discomfort, the responsible response isn't to push past it, it's to stop and check in. This is also where aftercare and follow-up conversation matter, the same way we've discussed on this channel before. Checking in afterward. How did that feel? Was there anything you didn't like? Is this something you'd want again? Does two things at once. It gives you honest information for the future, and it reinforces that her comfort was never optional in the first place. The surprising reasons behind this aren't really about the act at all. They're about trust, safety, and communication, which, if you've been paying attention across everything we cover on this channel, is the actual pattern behind nearly every topic in intimacy. This one's just more obvious about it than most. The research doesn't support the popular assumption that this is primarily about physical pleasure. The dominant themes are trust, intimacy, curiosity, and in some cases, pleasing a partner or navigating an unspoken relationship dynamic. Just as importantly, discomfort, disinterest, and in some cases coercion are real, documented parts of this picture too. The difference between a positive experience and a harmful one isn't technique. It's whether trust, communication, and genuine consent were actually present. If this video showed you how much psychology sits underneath something most people assume is purely physical, that pattern shows up across nearly every part of intimacy, which is exactly why understanding your body, her body, and the dynamics between you matters more than any single technique ever could. That's exactly what I built into the Vital Reset. In partnership with an experienced urologist, a complete step-by-step system covering exactly this kind of understanding. From communication to physical performance to lasting consistency. You'll find the full link waiting for you in the pinned comment. Subscribe and turn on notifications. There's a lot more honest, research-backed content coming. And leave a comment telling me what you want covered next. I read every one. Thank you for trusting me with this conversation today. I'm Janice Powell. I'll see you in the next one.